Before we get into my story and taking you through how I built Dun & Golf, and you'll also see in this workshop that we're using Foreign Rider as a reference point all the way through it so that you can actually get an understanding of how these principles will apply to what we're talking about with you. And there's a bunch of questions that we're going to go through here that when we get into clarity, we'll take you through these question by question in two segments of how I've had to answer these myself for what we're doing with this Foreign Rider project. And in my career, I've been doing my own entrepreneurial thing for close to 30 years, starting brands for even and longer than that. But I've also, in the last 10 years, I've had the chance to work with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners and people that are managing brands to really help them with what they're trying to achieve with their companies and their brands. And that as you're going through this process, what's really important when you're going through these questions, that you'll find that these are not really easy questions to answer. And when you're answering, some of the answers might actually be quite long, but you need to get to the point when you can articulate the answer to these questions easily. And not just you, what's going to happen is as you're building your team and as your team is developing and becoming a part of this whole process, defining who you are, what your purpose is, that the people that are on your team, the people that are connected to your company, whether it's in your supply chain, everyone needs to be able to answer these questions as easily as you would. And what I've seen in working with entrepreneurs and people that are managing brands, that you're so busy every day with all the things that are going on that sometimes it's difficult to step back and actually just work on the fundamentals of what you need to do here. So as you're getting into this, as you're thinking about your story from what we talked about in the intro, as you're about to look at what my story is, and you'll get an understanding of why these questions are going to be important and what you'll see for common patterns through that as you're going through these, by the end of this workshop, and if you're taking the time to write these questions down, which you really need to do when we start, think about if you want to answer them now. Keep going back to these questions as we move along. At the end of this workshop, you'll be able to answer these questions because we're going to show you how to actually do this through examples with Foreign Rider. We're going to show you companies that we've worked with where we've had to go through these exact same questions. And there's really three questions that are I think, the most critical when you're building your brand and what it stands for. And the questions that I want to ask people and the things that are interesting to me when I'm studying brands and the brands that resonate with me, the reason that certain brands have been important to me for a long time. And that's first question of who are you? And what I want to know and what I mean by that is who are you as a person? That the companies that I'm interested in, the companies that have had long-term advocates and people really support those brands, I want to know what that person is really all about. That when I'm working with entrepreneurs in particular, that's really the first question that I want to know. I want to get to know that person. I want to know what their beliefs are. And I want you to really think about that. Who are you? My wall that we went through of who am I, and you'll really see as we go through all these modules and what my beliefs are, who I am, how I've gotten to this point in my career of understanding that being myself is the most important part of what I'm doing. That's going to be critical for you. And I want you to think about who you are. And that will lead us into that next question of why are you here and why are you in business? That you have to have a defined reason of what it is you're trying to do with your company. And why did you start your business? What led you to go, I want to build my own business? Or if you're managing a brand, like what is the point of that business to actually exist? And that's an incredibly important question, but it's difficult for a lot of people to to really answer. You'll see when we get into the foreign rider stuff of exactly why we're in business. There's a defined reason in that, why Dunning was important when I built it in the early stages of the 2000s, that technology did not exist in that industry. I felt like with Dunning, it was a cotton-based industry. We had something to say. I had a voice of why technology was going to change that industry, and we changed that industry. That's why we were in business. And this next question, do you believe in what you do every single day? That's something for me that when I first started my very first brand in the early 90s of why I wanted to build that company, because I really believed in this idea of building athletic products and having a connection to sports that I loved. But as I've gone through my journey, that I've gone through points where I didn't believe in what I was doing every single day. And we're going to talk about that with Dunning as well. And you'll see that in the foreign rider segment at the end of why I walked away from a brand that I had built with Dunning in 2000, and 20 years later in January of this year, where I didn't believe in what we were doing and made the decision to leave that company. But that belief of what you do and all the things that you stand for and who you are, that's going to really help you when it comes to defining the fundamentals that we're going to talk about with what are your guiding principles and what are your core values. And that having core values and guiding principles, these are absolutely critical to what you're going to do every single day. That the people that are in your company, the people that you're connecting with in your company, your customer, your audience, your supply chain, that those guiding principles are going to be absolutely critical. And you have to be able to articulate those. And this is the part that when I'm working with entrepreneurs in particular, they have a lot to say, but they have a really difficult time just stepping back and just defining what those 4 or 5 guiding principles and core values can look like. And that's going to lead you into this next question, and that what is your culture? And that a company doesn't have culture, in my opinion. A company is a culture, and that culture is going to be developed from what those core values and guiding principles are, what your defined purpose is. And I think that it's also important for you to actually understand just what is the value of culture, and that's a question that I also want you to think about. And then this next question, where do you want to be in 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years? That I have this conversation with companies and with entrepreneurs that we work with all the time, that thinking where you want to be in a year and 5 years and 10 years, it's incredibly important, because next thing you know, you're a year into this journey, and then 5 years down the road, if you're not setting these defined goals of where you want to be and why you're in business and all the things that are important to you, it becomes very difficult, I think, to build that framework of all the things that you're going to want to have as this next question: what are your business goals? And for me, and you'll hear a lot of detail on this on Foreign Rider, that our goals, my goals 30 years into my entrepreneurial journey, very similar to what they were in the beginning. But along the way of my journey, some of those goals became clouded. That when you're first starting your business, for when I was first starting my very first business, you have this idea in your head that you want to build this huge company and make a lot of money. And as you get into the journey and start to have some success, and you start to realize that what is the purpose of actually having your own business and your own brand, and that's going to come down to really people. And when you get into this next question of what are your biggest challenges, that what do we do as entrepreneurs or people that are running companies or leading brands, that when you think about this, you're solving problems every day. That is what you're doing. You set goals and you're solving problems. And the challenges that are going to come at you, that's just part of running your brand and running your company and all the things that go along with that. And where do challenges usually come from? That every challenge that you're going to get faced with, whether it's in manufacturing or whatever happens around cash flow or any of these things that surface, what you're going to find is that it's always around people. And that when people in your company are all connected, that your audience is connected, that your supply chain is connected, that when you identify what these challenges can look like, how people are going to be a part of that as you're going through these challenges, it will start to make a lot more sense with what it is that you're trying to do. And when you're trying to prioritize what your challenges and what your opportunities look like, it's really important to map this out, that where do you want to focus your time? What's important to you when you're getting up every single day? What do you really want to focus on? What is the belief that you have of what you're doing every day that you need to prioritize those? That's incredibly important. And this next question that I think is just so important, back to the belief thing, that are you getting up each morning with a defined purpose of why you're in business? And if you are, have you taken the time to actually identify what that purpose looks like? What your purpose is personally and what your purpose is with your business and your brand. Again, understanding that your brand is a reflection of who you are, that it is the sum of all parts. And to actually define your purpose, there's a lot that goes into being able to do that. But having the ability to articulate that defined purpose in a simple manner is something that you're going to see us go through when we study Patagonia, how I've helped companies define their purpose, but having a simple defining purpose is incredibly important. And are you fully committed to doing it right and doing the right thing? This is something now that is, as transparency and consumer expectations are the norm, that there's a lot of surface noise out there with companies that are talking about being transparent and that they're doing the right thing and that they're being responsible. But today, the expectations are different. I feel like they've always been like this, but with what we're dealing with in everything in consumer behavior, that people really expect companies now to behave responsibly and to do the right thing. And that if your culture is built around understanding what doing the right thing means, whether it's when you're dealing with a vendor and you've had a problem, whether you're trying to collect a receivable and how you interact with that person, that doing it the right way and doing the right thing, that is going to go back to the fundamentals of what your purpose is. And when I'm working with a lot of people and going through my process with everything that I've done with my brands, that can you explain in a short sentence what your brand stands for? Who are you? What do you stand for? The ability to be able to do that, I think, is incredibly important. And knowing what your brand stands for without having to go through paragraphs and paragraphs of what that really means, that you can do that through simplicity. And we're going to talk about simplicity in detail. And this next question that I think is probably one of the most important questions that you're going to really have to think about, whether you know this or really do you have clarity on this, and that's, who do you want as part of your audience, and who's your customer, and who's a part of your community? But do you really know who your customer is? Do you really know the customer that you want? And this is something that I see people struggle with all the time. I've had to deal with this as my companies have grown, that when we were building Dunning, that we knew what our customer looked like and who they were, but sometimes outside pressure forces you to go after customers that you know are not the customer that you really want. And there's a difference between knowing who your customer is, who's the customer that you want, who's your audience, defining who your audience is, but even more importantly, who's the customer that you don't want. And in today's world, if you're trying to be everything to everybody and you're a generalist, it just does not work. That the brands and the companies that have built long-term advocates, they know exactly who they want as their audience and their customer, and they really know who they don't want. And there's a big difference between the two. So this last question of why should someone choose you over a competitor, that there's a big segment we're going to get into when we talk about a company being connected and disconnected. And this is about selling, and how selling is the most important part of what you do. That you have to be able to sell, that profitability is important, but selling is something that takes companies a long time to understand, that this is where everything is connected, that everything that the people in your company, on your sales team, or what you're doing as a business owner when it comes to selling, that everything goes back to how the rest of the company is going to function. What's happening on the design side, operations side, finance side, that this is all connected. And that the ability to go out and articulate to your customer, to the audience that you want, why you're different than your competitors, why someone should choose you over a competitor. This is something that I've had to deal with my entire career, that when we were building Dunning, we were competing with Nike, we were competing with Adidas, we were competing with Polo, we were competing with billion-dollar companies, and we were a company with no budget. But we were able to do that because we could articulate why we were different than those companies, that we knew who our customer was, and we really understood that we could articulate what we were doing from a technology perspective, how we were making products, and we were really able to articulate why we were different than our competitors. So that list of questions for you, it's something to really think about. Take the time, as I said, to write these down. We're going to put them up on the screen. In the segment at the end, you'll see where these questions are too, and you can actually write these down in the downloadable book that comes with this. But this is a good lead-in for you to really think about before you get into my story and how we came up with a lot of these questions and principles, before we get into the modules of what the 5 principles of brand unification are.